The author, Clifford Stoll, is probably best known for his 1989 book, The Cuckoo's Egg, the true story of how he almost single-handedly raised the alarm on German hackers who had been breaking into American defense and university computer systems. I will review that book at some time in the future after a reread. I do recall it as being very interesting back in the 1990s. Now, this book was very different. Silicone Snake Oil was published at the dawn, really the pre-dawn of regular people getting online, all the way back in 1995. It is, in many ways, a cry in the wilderness, a jeremiad that warns that the silky promise of fast, easy connectivity could turn to ashes in the mouth. Stoll warns in what is basically a series of themed essays about most of the problems that the net could cause many years before most of us had seen it. Now, to be balanced, he got almost all of his technical predictions wrong. The most obvious clangor is on page 190, where he calls on-demand video the killer app, the holy grail which would never be realized. Very amusing, except that it is this very killer app that has made the darker influences of the network pervade society in a way that this book does not anticipate. The second, more interesting thrust of his argument is that the overuse of computers, especially of networked computers, leads to such social ills as isolation, and to the development of a culture of superficiality, where people think that the information they possess is the same as understanding, a world where children and adults are taught to use the tools of computing to solve problems rather than learning the concepts that lie behind those problems. A world where people are forced to conform their thinking to the patterns of the machine, and human minds are shaped by the tool itself, rather than them using the tool to shape the world. A place where we talk freely with networked acquaintances, but have few real friends and a million easy diversions that bring little long-term happiness or satisfaction. In the earliest part of the book, he compares the pleasures and dangers of a real-world caving trip with the simulated ones in the text-driven game Adventure. He builds on this to compare the value of real-world, long-term activities and relationships with the shadow of these things experienced electronically. The tech is now far beyond what he imagined, but the comparison is even more important today. On pages 21 and 22 he says, quote, "Networks can change our social lives in many ways, introducing new friends and providing an outlet for our creative efforts. Yet I suspect these interactions are shallow and ephemeral." Unquote. Prophetic words when you consider that the newest generation to grow up on social media are more likely to suffer with depression, mental illness and loneliness, and apparently are finding it harder to maintain real-life relationships and sex lives than those who have gone before. The poverty of a culture of quick, easy, but shallow interaction has been spoken of by many later writers, and the shallow, superficial level of most people's work lives has been discussed in more modern books, such as Cal Newport's Deep Work. Stoll talks about the then-current mania for computerizing offices, comparing it to putting a TV set on every employee's desk, which is pretty prophetic when you consider how many hours are spent dealing with mostly irrelevant emails or wasted surfing the web on company machines. Discussing education, he warns about students being taught to use powerful tools, but never learning of the deeper concepts behind the problems that they are solving, of young minds distracted by the buzz and glow of the graphics of the time. But Stoll could not imagine the depth of teaching to the test and the social media distractions the modern youth are subject to. While discussing the future of literacy, Stoll quotes on page 25 a journalist of the San Francisco Chronicle who believed, quote, "Email and computer conferencing is teaching an entire generation about the flexibility and utility of prose." Unquote. This is somewhat laughable when one considers that the current state of US literacy leaves 32 million adults functionally illiterate. Most of the negative social changes wrought by networking of computers are only now coming to light and stem from things that Stoll explicitly thought would not take place: cheap high-speed internet and on-demand video. The invention of the tablet and the smartphone, which he did not predict, bring the network directly to even the very young, the poor and the tech illiterate who would never have bothered with the PC. As you can see, I was bookmarking like crazy because this book is absolutely full of nuggets that I wanted to bring to the review. Sadly, there really are just too many of them to mention. Clifford Stoll is actually a pretty fine writer considering that he is by profession an astronomer. The chapters have amusingly long titles such as, quote, an amalgam of popular fictions about the internet, including brief trips to China and the city of no illusion, unquote. Or, quote, wherein the author considers the future of the library, the myth of free information, and a novel way to heat bathwater, unquote. The prose itself is easy to read, friendly conversational text that is full of funny personal stories, historical anecdotes, and odd but interesting facts. To make his point, he uses what comes across as a high vocabulary without being boring, and it is always easy to follow. It does take a little longer to get through some chapters than you would expect, which makes me want to reread this book, both for my own pleasure and to see if I missed anything major. Score. Ease of reading, 4 out of 5. Easy, but more subtle than expected. Engagement value, 5. I found it hard to put down at times. Fun value, 5. Plenty of tidbits and good narrative. Language use, 3 or 4. Reread value, absolutely 5. Well worth a second or even a third read.